So the framework for the rights of nature is such a powerful framework. I've been sitting here all day thinking how our synapses are being rewired. Although this is the framework of the rights of nature is among indigenous and traditional cultures everywhere, in our modern world, there's been such repetition of the market economy and our purpose on this earth as being, in search of jobs, and in search of a sacred market economy, that we have forgotten, maybe we're not hearing enough these frameworks. So I think we're actually doing a great thing today, is creating new synapses in our minds in how to understand this framework, how to look at everything from the perspective of this framework. This is a paradigm shift. It's instantaneous, and it can only grow from here, and it's collective. As a community, we're creating a community understanding of this, and I hope everyone here is able to take and spread this framework to 10 or 20 others or thousands of others, and through this way, we can build this global alliance for the rights of nature. Now, of course, I feel that this cases around the human rights defenders is really key, because it isn't from this new perspective of Earth as a living system, and that we are all connected, and we are part of the collective intelligence of the Earth, as the Declaration on the Rights of Nature suggests. Then the human rights defenders are actually the Earth defending itself. And I've loved seeing that logo around town, that this is the Earth defending itself, and that these defenders are to be encouraged. It's like the immune system. We need to give them vitamins and encourage them to build up the defense system of the Earth, of the living system of the Earth. And so they should not be punished. They should be encouraged, and that it should be all of our sacred work and the sacred life purpose of all of us, and to protect and defend Mother Earth, to protect and defend the web of life, and to hold the primacy of the web of life as the most important thing we're about. This is also this concept we heard from indigenous contributors earlier today, of being good ancestors, of being responsible to the seventh generation. And that framework of being good ancestors and to treat the earth from a perspective of seventh generation is another powerful framework that I think we need to, it's another way of basically reframing the narrative of what we are about, what is our purpose as human beings on this earth. And of course, my heart's been broken, as many of you, hearing all of the tragedies around the earth. And it seems like an endless stream of really wrong ways of seeing the world are producing these technological fixes, these things like bioengineering and geoengineering, and really heartbreaking to hear about all the devastation and disaster that's happening around the world. And one case that's not even here today, but maybe could be a recommendation for a future tribunal case, is the case of the gold mine, the big iron ore mine in Brazil, where 2 dams broke and a whole river is actually threatened. Now, if we were to look at the rights that Ecuador has violated, in the case of the Ecuador's, the very many cases that we heard about Ecuador, we would say that not only there have been articles of the Universal Declaration on the Rights of Mother Earth have been violated, but also Ecuador's own constitution rights and bodies of law have been violated. Ecuador would be, in the case of the beating of the women, who are indigenous women who are reclaiming the right to free prior informed consent, their collective rights to their territories and their rainforest to be free from oil. If we're talking also about the right of associations like Fundación Pachamama to exist and to operate and to be able to organize and express freely and provide both positive services to communities and also work on advocacy and policy change. This is a free right under any democratic open society, but in particular is recognized by both the Universal Declaration and Ecuador's own constitution. That's really Article 2 talks about every being has the right to well-being and to live free from torture or cruel treatment by human beings. And also Article 3H talks about empowering human beings and institutions to defend the rights of Mother Earth and of all beings. And so we've seen this horrible trend in Ecuador from being a proponent of the rights of nature to going backwards and now prosecuting human rights defenders and indigenous peoples who basically have legal rights to their collective territories and are governors of their own lands. And so in this case, we're seeing an alarming trend, not just in Ecuador, but also in Peru, where we've had a huge number of people dying who are defending against illegal logging. In Ecuador itself, we've seen in Yasuní National Park, we heard from Yasunidos. We also know that in Ecuador, there's been these, oil-induced violence among isolated and contacted peoples. And there's been several massacres that have occurred in Ecuador in the last several years. In the last 3 years, there's been massacres. Some 30 people have been killed in an intertribal conflict perpetuated by the oil industry. And we heard that Fundación Pachamama was shut down and their appeals were denied. We heard that Yasunidos attempted a referendum and was shut down, even though majority of the Ecuadorian public supported leaving oil in the ground in Ecuador. We heard that currently, even today, I believe there's still people in jail. A dozen or so people are in jail still from the protests that happened in August. Additionally, there's 10 or 11, we heard from Manari, Ushigua, and from Belén that there's still people who are facing human rights charges. They're facing charges by the government for acting in defense of their human rights. So for all of these reasons, we want to say that we'd like to recommend the tribunal would like to find Ecuadorian government guilty of violation of human rights, that we are calling on the government to immediately free political prisoners, to drop the charges against the leaders, to allow the NGOs to be permitted to carry out their activities, to respect the Inter-American Court decision on respecting indigenous peoples' free, prior, informed consent to decisions that affect their territories, and to say no to fossil fuel drilling if so they choose, and to respect their rights immediately, to respect their rights to freely organize and express themselves, free of intimidation, free of harassment. That companies, also the oil industry is all over Ecuadorian Amazon, whether it's Chevron or Andes Petroleum from China and others who are basically attempting to divide the communities, continuously going back and seeding divisions and offering bribes. And this really speaks to the importance of communities' rights to organize and to be heard and their voices to be heard. And to solutions like the Sarayaku solution for the living forest. If you go to sarayaku.org, they talk about their living forest, this idea of sacred lands that are saved for all of nature's creatures, and that they as indigenous peoples are the guardians of the forest. And I'm also encouraged by the global alliance that was just recently launched by legendary Chief Raoni of the Defenders of Mother Nature's Rights. The Alliance of Indigenous Peoples in Defense of Mother Nature's Rights had a 2-day summit here, and I think that's another thing that we need to encourage and support. We need to support and align and connect, like nature itself, create these interconnected webs. Now, lastly, on the cases, so I think those things will bring the case to close in the case of Ecuador. In the case of Houston, Manchester, I really want to thank Judith Nieto and Brian Paris for coming for their testimonies. I think it's a very important thing that you brought forth, which is this whole idea of the communities affected by this industrial mindset that are being oppressed and intimidated and oppressed both in intimidation by authorities, but also just the systemic oppression that these communities are facing, and the need to look at revising the articles of the, amending the declaration in order to have a more specific provision that addresses the needs of the communities who are dealing with this kind of oppressive, systemic oppression. So on that note, I want to just say thank you for this amazing this amazing consciousness-shifting, paradigm-shifting exercise that we hope that continues to grow and replicate like nature itself. And nothing to say that doesn't hold anyone here from organizing a tribunal in their own communities to continue to bring cases that are in your area. Of course, we are limited in how many cases we can bring. So I appreciate your time and energy. Thank you.